Deane, Deane, she murmured, as if in reproach for something of long standing. There was a silence in which the whole thing was alive there for those of them who knew. Cora and Edith, sitting close together, did not turn to one another. He wondered if they were thinking of the countless times Ruth had been on that porch with them in the years they were all growing up together. Edith's face was turned away from the light now. Suddenly Cora demanded, "Well, there's no prospect at all of a divorce?" Mrs. Lawrence rose and went over to Amy and opened a lively conversation as to whether she found her new maid satisfactory. It left him and Edith and Cora to themselves. "No," he answered her question. "I guess not. Not that I know of." "How terrible it all is!" Cora exclaimed, not without feeling. And then, following a pause, she and Edith were speaking of how unbecoming the new hats were, talking of the tea one of their old friends was giving for Cora next day. He sat there thinking how it was usually those little things that closed in over Ruth. When the thought of her, feeling about her, broke through, it was soon covered over with, discussion of how someone was wearing her hair, the health of someone's baby or merits of someone's cook. He listened to their talk about the changes there had been in Freeport in the last 10 or 12 years. They spoke of deaths, of marriages, of births, of people who had prospered and people who had gone to pieces, of the growth of the town, of new people, of people who had moved away. In a word, they spoke of change. Edith would refer things to him, and he occasionally joined in the talk, but he was thinking less of the incidents they spoke of than of how it was change they were talking about. This enumeration of changes gave him a sense of life as a continuous moving on, as a thing going swiftly by. Life had changed for all those people they were telling Cora about. It had changed for themselves, too. He had continued to think of Edith and the others as girls. But they had moved on from that. They were moving on all the time. Why, they were over 30. As a matter of fact, they were women near the middle 30s. People talked so lightly of change, and yet change meant that life was swiftly sweeping one on. He turned from that too somber thinking to Amy, watched her as she talked with Mrs. Lawrence. They too were talking of Freeport people and affairs, the older woman bringing Amy into the current of life there. His heart warmed a little to Edith's mother for being so gracious to Amy, though that did not keep him from marveling at how she could be both so warm and so hard, so loving within the circle of her approval, so unrelenting out beyond it. Amy would make friends, he was thinking, lovingly proud. How could it be otherwise when she was so lovely and so charming? She looked so slim, so very young in that white dress she was wearing. Well, and she was young, little older now than these girls had been when they really were the girls. That bleak sense of life as going by fell away. Here was life, the beautiful life he was to have with Amy. He watched the breeze play with her hair, and his whole heart warmed to her in the thought of the happiness she brought him, in his gratitude for what love made of life. He forgot his resentment about Ruth, forgot the old bitterness and old hurt that had just been newly stirred in him. Life had been a lonely thing for a number of years after Ruth went away. He had Amy now. All was to be different. They all stood at the head of the steps for a moment as he and Amy were bidding the others good night. They talked of the tea Edith was to give for Amy the following week, what Amy would wear, how many people there would be. "And let me pick you up and take you to the tea tomorrow," Edith was saying. "It will be small and informal, just Cora's old friends, and then you won't have so many strangers to meet next week." He glowed with new liking of Edith, felt anew that sweetness in her nature that, after her turning from Ruth, had not been there for him. Looking at her through this new friendliness, he was thinking how beautifully she had developed. Edith was a mother now. She had 2 lovely children. She was larger than in her girlhood. She had indeed flowered, ripened. Edith was a sweet woman, he was thinking. "I do think they're the kindest, most beautiful people," Amy exclaimed warmly, as they started slowly homeward through the fragrant softness of the May night. End of Chapter 1. Fidelity by Susan Glaspell. Chapter 2. He had known that Amy would ask, and wondered a little at her waiting so long. It was an hour later, as she sat before her dressing table brushing her hair, that she turned to him with a little laugh and asked, "Who is this mysterious Ruth?" He sighed. He was tired, and telling about Ruth seemed a large undertaking. Amy colored and turned from him and picked up her brush. "Don't tell me if you don't want to."